10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 115. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 115 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Hope you had an awesome week, and I'm really excited to get down to the second episode of our practice progressions. But before we get into that, as we do with every episode, just wanted to let all of you out there know that if you want to grab the PDFs to these episodes, please go to our Patreon website. That's patreon.com/10minutejazzlesson. Or you can go to our website where you can find a lot of other cool stuff, including all of our back episodes and lots of other goodies over there. That's 10minutejazzlesson.com. And you can also find your way to the Patreon site from there. As I always say, this is a listener-supported show. So the only funds that we receive to keep the podcast going are from you. So if you go over to that Patreon site, you'll find out that you get basically every single thing that we do here at the show for only $3 a month, which is a pretty great deal considering you get a brand new lesson complete with the PDF every single week. So if you've got $3 a month of your hard-earned money to spare for us, we would appreciate that so much. Like I always say, it's probably not a lot of money to you, but it makes a huge difference to us, especially when a lot of you out there find it in the kindness of your hearts to donate a couple of bucks a month towards us. We really appreciate it. So thank you to all of our patrons that are out there already. As I always say, we couldn't do it without you, and we really couldn't. So we just really appreciate you taking the time to go over there and throw us a few bucks every month. All right, let's get into today's episode. Okay, so last week we talked about some of these practice progressions that I like to use and how much I rely on them. And what we did last week was we presented you with circle of fourths progressions, but they stayed in one quality of chord as they went around through all 12 keys. And I truly believe that that's the best place to start, and it's also a really great progression for certain things that we might be working on, certain pieces of vocabulary, getting certain sounds into our playing. This week what we're going to do is we're going to turn it into a little bit more of like a real life progression, right? So what I mean by that is we're not going to keep it just one quality. Very rarely do we see a tune that has only major 7 chords in it or has only minor 7 chords in it. Most of the time we see a bunch of different qualities of chords in the tunes that we're playing. So that's what these practice progressions this week are going to reflect. Now let me say, it still does go around the circle of fourths. That hasn't changed this week. Next week we are going to switch up a little bit from that, where we're going to escape that circle of fourths thing. This week, not so much. We're staying with the circle of fourths. After all, it is the most useful chord progression for us as jazz musicians because jazz moves so much around the circle of fourths. I want to stick with it for now. But what we're going to do now is we're going to do a bunch of 5-to-1 relationships. So that's really what the circle of fourths is. It's, 5-to-1, 5-to-1, 5-to-1. It's just that we haven't been treating it that way up until now, if that makes sense. So what we're going to do this week is we're going to do 2 different ways of going from dominant to major. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do dominant with an alteration to minor. So if you look at the first page of your PDF from this week, you'll notice that I start with a G7 chord and then go to a C major 7 chord, right? Then F7 to B flat major, and so on and so forth around the circle of fourths, going dominant major, dominant major, dominant major. So now we truly are doing 5-to-1, 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 5-to-1. And we're making our way around 6 keys in that first progression of 5-to-1 relationships. So we have to do 2 of these. If we want to do 5-to-1 in every single key, we've got to do 2 separate progressions. So what you'll notice is we have 12 bars with repeats around them of those first 6 keys of 5-to-1. Then when we move down to the second progression, what we have instead of G7 to C major 7, we start with a C7 chord and that moves to F major 7. So now what we're doing is we're covering the other 6 keys. We're turning all the major chords from the previous progression into dominant and vice versa, right? So now we've got all 12 keys of regular 5-1 in major, no alterations. The nice thing about this is though, is that even though there aren't any alterations on these 5 chords, we can put all the alterations we'd like onto them and project whatever sound we're going for. So that's what's going to be a little bit different about this week. Last week, I provided you with a piece of vocabulary that I wanted you to put into all 12 keys. This week, I want you to try something different. What I'd like you to do is, instead of playing something that's pre-programmed, something that you've memorized and you're trying to get through all 12 keys, I want you to go for a specific sound. Right? So you could start with just the pure Mixolydian mode and practice that first. Make sure you can get through all 12 keys of just that straight up and down Mixolydian sound of 5-1. But then shortly after that, I want you to add maybe an alteration. So what I'd like you to try when you're practicing this week is I'd like you to try doing a Lydian dominant sound over the 5 chords. And that's like not going to be super out there. It's not insanely altered. Really, we're just altering one note from the Mixolydian. What we're doing is we're sharpening the 4, right? We're giving ourselves that sharp 11 sound without any other alterations at all in there. And I think this would be a really good place for you to start. Now, again, you're not going for the same exact thing in every key because different keys are going to lend themselves to different things that we're going to play on our respective instruments. It's just the way that instruments work, right? So you're just going for that sound of Lydian dominant. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the first practice progression and I am going to play through those 6 keys maybe 1 or 2 times, and I'm going to use that Lydian dominant sound, and hopefully you'll be able to hear some of the sharp 11s that I throw in there. But hopefully this will also sound a little bit like a solo and not really like an exercise. It's going to be like an exercise in the way that I'm going for the same sound color over each dominant chord, but I'm not going to be playing the exact same thing like you heard me do last week. So check it out. This is the first practice progression, the first 6 keys, and I'm going to be working on playing my Lydian dominant over every 5 chord. So there's an example of a way that I would work on this where I'm not working on specific vocabulary, and you could definitely hear that sharp 11 over every single chord. At least I tried to hit it on every single dominant chord. So if I did that for an hour, I would probably come up with some pretty cool stuff, and I would get a lot more comfortable in some of those keys that were uncomfortable for me. So now let's move over to the second 2 practice progressions. Now what I have is a flat 9 dominant chord, so a diminished dominant, going to a minor 7 chord. So these are minor 2-5-1s, and I find that you can use a lot more alterations a lot more comfortably when you're going to a minor key and you have a minor 5, or I'm sorry, a minor 2-5-1. And obviously we're not using the 2-5-1 here, we're just using 5-1. But 5 is really the important part of the 2-5-1. That's where we build all that tension. So this is this really important relationship that we are investigating while we're playing over this. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually not going to play diminished dominant over these. I'm actually going to use the altered scale over this. And if you're not familiar with what the altered scale is, go back to our episode on the altered scale and investigate it. But what you'll find is that this one is a lot more tense than what I just played, which was sharp 11. So this is your third practice progression on the PDF from this week, the first 6 keys of your minor 5-1 cadences. And I'm going to use the altered scale over these. Let's check these out. So those are a little bit more challenging to the ear, and they're much more challenging to play over, but it's something to work towards. If you don't feel like you could do that yet, start putting some time in over these progressions, and eventually, I promise, you will definitely be able to do that. It's just that those are, a lot more complicated sounds. And you can start working your way up to those by using those first progressions to major and not altering them so much. And remember, you can use this idea of dominant to some type of 1 chord, and you can put whatever alterations you would like into those. It's not like you just have to follow these suggestions and there's no straying from them. I want you to be creative with these, okay? So make sure you go and post some thoughts about this on our brand new Facebook group. This is going to be the 10-minute jazz lesson community page, and it's going to be a group that you can join. And what I'm hoping we can do is hear some of you out there actually putting some of these practices into action, get some reactions from the rest of the group. Maybe you can ask questions, help each other out. So make sure you go on Facebook and search for that 10-minute jazz lesson community Facebook group. And I think that'll be a good gathering place for all of us and allow us to connect with each other. We've got listeners from all over the world, so it'd be really cool if we kind of formed a community around this. All right, send me any questions you might have. Drop a question on the new Facebook group and let me know what's going on with you. Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're not a patron yet, we'd really appreciate it. If you got a few bucks a month that you can throw our way, it makes a huge difference for us. And thank you to everybody out there that's already doing that. All right, we will see you next week. Have a great weekend, everybody. Bye.